What secrets lie within the abandoned home of a rock and roll icon? Fats Domino, the legendary pianist who shaped American music, lived a life of fame and fortune. But after his passing in 2017, his once vibrant home in New Orleans now stands as a haunting reminder of both his legacy and the devastating events that nearly erased it all. What really happened to Fats Domino's fortune? How did he survive Hurricane Katrina's wrath, only to fade from the public eye? And what eerie remnants of his past still linger inside his abandoned home? Join us as we uncover the hidden story of Fats Domino's final days, his lasting impact, and the surprising truth about his net worth today. Before auto-tune and digital effects, musicians had to rely on pure, undeniable talent, and Fats Domino had plenty of it. Born Antoine Dominique Domino Jr. on February 26, 1928, in New Orleans, he grew up to become one of the earliest and most beloved pioneers of a new genre that had kids dancing and parents wondering what the world was coming to: rock and roll. According to the New York Times, Domino was largely self-taught, learning to play piano by listening to and mimicking the jazz and boogie-woogie legends of his time. But he didn't just copy, he created something entirely his own. As a teenager, he joined bassist Billy Diamond's nightclub band, where Diamond famously described him. "When you saw Fats Domino, it was, let's have a party." He was a great singer, he was a great artist, and whatever he was doing, nobody could beat him. But beyond the hits and the history books, how much do you really know about this rock and roll trailblazer? Fats Domino was the grandson of slaves and the son of sharecroppers. To put it in perspective, Fats Domino was born just 65 years after the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation. Given that timeline, it's not surprising that his father came from a Haitian family that had first arrived in America as slaves. After gaining their freedom, they remained in Louisiana, where, according to Acadiana Profile, Domino's parents worked as sharecroppers on land that had once been part of the Laura plantation. Domino grew up in the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans, a place that shaped not just his childhood but his entire life. Unlike many stars who leave home after making it big, he stayed close to his roots for most of his career. The Atlantic describes the area in those days as mostly rural, with unpaved streets, farm animals, and scarce electricity and indoor plumbing. Had he been born anywhere else, under different circumstances, modern music might have taken a different path. The rich mix of Creole culture, Haitian heritage, a distinct French-influenced accent, and New Orleans' thriving blues scene all blended with his natural talent to create a sound that would forever change American music. He taught himself how to play. Sometimes parents have no way of knowing what will ignite a passion in their child. For Fats Domino, that spark came in the form of an old piano that his family inherited when he was just 10 years old. The moment it arrived in their home, he was hooked. He spent so much time playing that his parents eventually moved it to the garage, perhaps hoping to contain the constant sound of his growing obsession. Domino's first real musical mentor was his brother-in-law, Harrison Verrett, a jazz musician who introduced him to the basics of notes and chords. But from there, it was all Domino. His gift was almost otherworldly. He could listen to a record just a few times and perfectly replicate it. He later downplayed his talent in a rare interview, simply saying, "I had a good ear for catching notes and different things." But the world would come to recognize just how special that ear was in the unforgettable melodies of songs like Blueberry Hill. Formal schooling didn't hold his attention for long. He dropped out in the 4th grade and went straight to work, as many kids of his generation did. He took a job as an assistant iceman, delivering blocks of ice to homes across New Orleans. But even then, music was never far from his mind. "In the houses where people had a piano in their rooms, I'd stop and play," he recalled. "That's how I practiced." Why Fats? There are a few different stories about how Fats Domino got his famous nickname. But one thing is certain, it stuck, and it ultimately helped launch his career. By 1949, Domino had landed a record deal, and it was around this time that he and his longtime collaborator, David Bartholomew, wrote The Fat Man. The song became a massive hit, selling over 1 million copies within just a few years and securing his place as one of rock and roll's earliest pioneers. But long before the song, Domino was already known as Fats. The nickname didn't originally have anything to do with his size. According to The New Yorker, it was given to him by Billy Diamond, the bassist and bandleader he played with in his late teens. Diamond saw something in Domino's playing that reminded him of two jazz greats, Fats Waller and Fats Pichon, and the name was a tribute to their legendary talent. However, once The Fat Man was released, with lyrics like, "They call me the Fat Man, 'cause I weigh 200 pounds," the nickname became forever associated with his stature. At just 5 feet 5 inches, Domino had a stocky build and was known for his warm, jovial personality. He fully embraced the name, often joking that he was as wide as he was tall. Interestingly, his nickname even played a small role in another rock and roll legend's career. When a young Ernest Evans performed The Twist for Dick Clark and his wife, he capped it off with a flawless Fats Domino impression. Clark's wife thought the stage name Chubby would suit him well, modeled after Domino's nickname, and from then on he was known as Chubby Checker. Fats Domino's music was absolutely groundbreaking. Fats Domino may not have the same level of name recognition today as someone like Elvis Presley, but his impact on rock and roll is undeniable. In fact, even Presley himself acknowledged Domino's influence. In a 1957 interview, Elvis set the record straight. "A lot of people seem to think I started this business, but rock and roll was here a long time before I came along. Let's face it, I can't sing it like Fats Domino can. I know that." Elvis went even further, calling Domino the real king of rock and roll, and there's plenty of truth to that statement. According to American Blues Scene, Fats Domino was the first rock musician who was marketed purely for his music, breaking away from the novelty and gimmick-driven songs that had dominated before. Fans recognized his raw talent immediately, and it paid off in staggering record sales. With over 65 million records sold, Domino was the biggest-selling rock artist of his time, second only to Elvis himself. Domino is even credited with recording the very first rock album. While music historians continue to debate the technical definition of what qualifies as the first true rock record, The Guardian points to Domino's work as the foundation of the genre. However, his very first recorded song was something even more unique. It was Hey La Baz, a traditional tune dedicated to the voodoo god of luck. Fats Domino is credited with going a long way in desegregation of rock and roll. At the height of Fats Domino's career, America was still deeply segregated, and Jim Crow laws dictated racial divisions in nearly every aspect of life, including music. But Domino's influence went far beyond just shaping rock and roll. He was also a pioneer in breaking down the barriers that separated black and white audiences. Rick Coleman, author of Fats Domino and the Lost Dawn of Rock and Roll, describes Domino as one of the first artists who physically tore down segregation in music. His concerts became battlegrounds for integration, where fans, regardless of race, ignored the enforced divisions and simply wanted to enjoy the music together. One particularly infamous concert on May 4, 1956, in Roanoke, Virginia, started with a clear separation. Black fans were on the dance floor, while white fans were crammed into the balcony, so packed that it was over double its intended capacity. Before long, white fans started making their way downstairs to dance alongside black concert-goers. But not everyone was thrilled. Some angry audience members began throwing beer bottles down at the crowd, igniting tensions. This scene played out at many of Domino's shows. Time and time again, barriers and ropes meant to separate fans were torn down, and in the chaos, fights often broke out. The media frequently labeled these incidents as race riots, but PBS argues that the real source of the unrest wasn't the fans, it was law enforcement. In many cases, the trouble only started when authorities stepped in to enforce segregation, using tear gas and other aggressive tactics to break up the crowd. But none of it stopped Fats Domino. He continued to perform integrated concerts and remained one of the rare black artists of the era who consistently topped the charts with both black and white audiences, dealing with racism in 1960s America. As one of the most visible faces of rock and roll, a genre already viewed as dangerous and controversial, Fats Domino often found himself at the center of racial tensions. His music brought together black and white audiences in ways that many weren't ready to accept, and as a result, his concerts sometimes became flashpoints for conflict. One particularly volatile incident happened during a performance at a naval base in Rhode Island, where a riot broke out among the crowd. When reporters later asked Domino if the music was responsible for inciting violence, he responded with his signature laid-back charm, simply smiling and shrugging before saying, "Well, you know, when the Navy and the Marines get together." PBS notes that this easygoing attitude masked the very real dangers he faced as a black man leading the charge in an era of segregation and racial unrest. It wasn't just concert halls that became battlegrounds. In 1956, after a show in Roanoke, Virginia, Domino and his band found themselves in immediate danger when an angry white mob formed outside. Forced to flee, they rushed back to their hotel, the only one in the black section of town that would accommodate them. Despite his immense popularity and status as one of the biggest hitmakers of the time, Domino still faced the same harsh realities of segregation as countless other black Americans. Perhaps one of the most chilling encounters came when his band accidentally crossed paths with the Ku Klux Klan. According to his longtime saxophone player, Herbert Hardesty, the band's tour bus got lost while traveling through South Carolina. Hardesty, the one driving, pulled over to ask for directions, only to realize he had stopped in the middle of a Klan gathering. Hooded figures stood in front of a burning cross as he cautiously explained that they were just looking for the highway. To his surprise, the Klansmen gave him the directions without incident. "They were very nice," Hardesty later recalled in an interview with NPR. The first rock and roll riot was at a Fats Domino concert. Rock and roll has always had a reputation for stirring things up, especially among those who just don't get it. And while a Fats Domino concert might seem like one of the least likely places for trouble, history says otherwise. The first ever rock and roll riot happened at his July 7, 1956, show at the Palomar Gardens Ballroom in San Jose. The night didn't start on the best note. Domino and his band were about 2 hours late, leaving the crowd of 3,500 restless, and in many cases a little too deep into their drinks. But once he finally hit the stage, the energy shifted, and for a while, everything seemed fine. That changed during intermission, when all it took was one beer bottle to send the entire venue into chaos. As the first bottle shattered, breaking the overhead lights, fights erupted throughout the ballroom. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Windows were smashed as people tried to escape, others pushed toward the emergency exits, and just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, someone decided to set off firecrackers. By the time the dust settled, 11 people had been arrested. The media ran wild with stories of the so-called rock and roll riot, and for a moment, San Jose even considered banning the music altogether. Cooler heads eventually prevailed, and instead of outlawing rock, the city decided to ban bottles at concerts instead. Still, the incident ignited a much bigger conversation. What kind of influence did this new music really have on teenagers? Was rock and roll a force for good, or was it leading young people down a reckless path? White artists built their career on him. According to the Belleville News-Democrat, Pat Boone was one of the biggest stars to build his career by covering songs originally recorded by black artists, including Fats Domino's "Ain't That a Shame." Both versions were released in 1955, and the story goes that when legendary DJ Alan Freed polled his listeners, they claimed to prefer Boone's take on the song. That success gave Boone the confidence to make statements like they were thrilled because they wrote the songs. They made more money from my records than they did from their own, and it introduced them to a far larger audience that they didn't have any access to at that point. But was that actually true? Not exactly. Brian Ward, a professor of American Studies at Northumbria University, argues that artists like Fats Domino, Bo Diddley, and Chuck Berry were already crossing racial barriers and scoring major hits with both black and white audiences. The reality was that record companies often took advantage of black musicians by offering them a flat fee for the rights to a song, then making massive profits by having white artists record and market their own versions. Boone, however, saw no problem with his approach. He often pointed to the success of his cover as proof that there were no hard feelings. Domino himself, Boone claimed, would flash his rings before playing Ain't That a Shame and Joke. Pat Boone bought me this ring with this song. Fats Domino suffered from severe stage fright and anxiety. Why isn't Fats Domino remembered the way Elvis is? It's a fair question. Filmmaker Joe Lauro, who was invited to make a film about Domino, had a straightforward answer. He was just being forgotten because of his shyness and the fact that he lived a very private, uncrazy life. The man was on the road for 40 years, but he's not lighting the piano on fire. He's not marrying his cousin that's 13. Of course, his extreme shyness is the reason why he was forgotten. Unlike some of his rock and roll peers, Domino stayed out of trouble. No scandals, no arrests. When he wasn't playing music, he was at home, cooking. His longtime collaborator told NPR that he was always extremely shy and much preferred eating in the comfort of his own home over industry events. Instead of setting up formal interviews, he was more likely to drop by his favorite local bars unannounced. When he did schedule interviews, he often canceled. But according to Nola, his introverted nature wasn't just about shyness. By 2007, Domino, then 79 years old, had been away from performing for some time, and when he was booked for a show at Tipitina's, no one was sure if he'd go through with it. Years away from the spotlight had only made his stage fright and anxiety worse, something he'd struggled with throughout his career. But that night was different. The concert was a benefit for New Orleans' 9th Ward, a place close to his heart, and that, more than anything, pushed him to step back on stage. Fats Domino pretty much retired in 1995. Fats Domino's career spanned decades, and in 1986, he was among the very first musicians inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, alongside legends like Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Sam Cooke, James Brown, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, and the Everly Brothers. Even then, he was still performing on and off, but his last official tour came in 1995, and it was a tough one. The tour was plagued by illness and exhaustion. Domino, already dealing with chronic health issues, struggled to keep up as they made their way through Europe. In the UK, where he was set to perform alongside Little Richard and Chuck Berry, things took a serious turn. He fell gravely ill and was rushed to the hospital. The Independent reported that doctors warned him continuing to perform could do severe damage to his health. The official diagnosis was a serious infection, but it was likely made worse by emotional strain. Just days earlier, he had learned of his sister's passing. After that, Domino largely stayed in New Orleans, avoiding long trips and high-profile appearances. He even declined traveling to Washington, D.C. to personally receive the National Medal of Arts. Though he made occasional exceptions for private performances and select sets at the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival, for the most part, he quietly stepped away from the spotlight, spending his later years in the city he loved. Fats Domino lost just about everything in Katrina. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina tore through the Gulf Coast, leaving behind unimaginable destruction and a staggering death toll of 1,833. In the chaotic days that followed, as people desperately searched for loved ones and news trickled in about the devastation, rumors began to spread that Fats Domino was among the casualties. Even with urgent warnings to evacuate, Domino chose to stay in his beloved Lower Ninth Ward home. According to The Independent, part of his decision was out of devotion to his wife, Rosemary, who was ill and unable to travel. The other part? Plain old stubbornness. But when the levees broke and floodwaters surged through the city, there was no escaping the disaster. The water rose to 15 feet, swallowing homes and leaving entire neighborhoods underwater. Domino and his family were finally rescued on September 1st, days after the storm had passed. They were taken to the Superdome, where thousands of other survivors sought refuge in grim conditions. Despite everything, he took it in stride. In a 2006 interview, he recalled, "I wasn't too nervous. I had my little wine and a couple of beers with me. I'm all right." But the damage was catastrophic. He lost nearly everything: his home, his gold records, his memorabilia, a lifetime of personal treasures, all claimed by the floodwaters. Yet just a year later, he proved his resilience with the release of Alive and Kickin', his first new album in a decade. The title was a nod to both his survival and the unbreakable spirit of New Orleans. Part of the proceeds went toward helping fellow musicians rebuild their lives. Even the White House took notice of his losses. In 2006, President George W. Bush personally visited Domino to replace his National Medal of Arts, a small gesture to honor the legendary musician who had given so much to American music. His piano went on a journey of its own. Among the many irreplaceable treasures Fats Domino lost to Hurricane Katrina, one held a particularly special place in his heart: his iconic white Steinway piano. A striking centerpiece of his home, the grand piano had been featured in countless family photos, a symbol of his legacy and love for music. But when the storm hit, it was swallowed by the floodwaters, sitting submerged for weeks beneath 9 feet of water that surged in from the industrial canal. By the time the wreckage was cleared, the piano was a heartbreaking sight: waterlogged, warped, and covered in grime. Yet, it wasn't forgotten. The effort to restore it was immense, with conservators pouring $35,000 into bringing it back to its former glory. But while they could revive its elegant exterior, the instrument itself was beyond saving. Replacing every flood-damaged part would have essentially created a brand-new piano, erasing the history embedded in its keys. Still, its story didn't end there. Instead of being discarded, the piano found a new purpose. In 2013, it was officially dedicated at the Louisiana State Museum, standing as a powerful symbol of resilience, not just for Fats Domino, but for New Orleans itself. At the ceremony, Lieutenant Governor Jay Dardenne reflected on its significance, saying, "Fats Domino's beautiful grand piano, fully restored, will serve as the perfect symbol for Louisiana's resilient nature and ever-evolving musical heritage." Fats and Rosemary got married in 1948 and had 8 children together. Fats Domino met his wife Rosemary early in his music career, and the two married in 1948. Together, they built a family of 8 children, all of whom had names beginning with the letter A: Antonio, Adonica, Antoinette, Andre, Andrea, Anola, Anatole, and Antoine III. By the early 1990s, after decades of touring and performing, Fats experienced a serious health scare that changed everything. In 1991, while on tour in England, he fell ill during a performance. A doctor in Sheffield later warned him that continuing to perform live could put his health in serious danger. At the time, Fats was 67 years old and was sharing a tour bill with fellow rock and roll pioneers Chuck Berry and Little Richard. It was only the first night of their tour when he suddenly became unwell. He was rushed to the hospital, and his promoter, Jenny Halsall, later explained to The Independent, "Towards the end of his set, he started to feel very unwell, and he knew that something was wrong. Doctors confirmed that Fats had a serious infection, and he has been told that he must rest. They have given him strict instructions not to perform live until his condition improves or it will severely damage his health. By then, Fats had spent over 20 years touring the world, and after this health scare, he decided it was time to slow down. From that point on, he rarely left New Orleans, choosing instead to enjoy a quieter life at home with Rosemary and their children. Thanks to the royalties from his long and successful career, he was able to live comfortably, surrounded by family and the city he loved. I'm walking. Fats Domino may have left his home on Caffin Avenue during Hurricane Katrina, but Louisiana was always where his heart remained. However, he never returned to live in New Orleans. In 2006, a year after the storm, he was still uncertain about his future in the city. When asked if he planned to rebuild his home, he responded with quiet hope. "I hope so. I like it down there." But despite his deep love for New Orleans, he never moved back. Instead, Domino settled in Harvey, Louisiana, just across the Mississippi River from the city that had shaped his life and music. It was there, on October 24, 2017, that he passed away at the age of 89. His family confirmed that he died of natural causes, leaving behind a legacy that forever changed rock and roll. Through it all, he remained humble about his success. Reflecting on his music in a 1985 interview with the Los Angeles Times, he said, "I was lucky enough to write songs that carry a good beat and tell a real story that people could feel was their story too, something that old people or the kids could both enjoy." And decades later, they still do. Fats and his family have a net worth of around $8 million. Although Fats Domino rarely toured in his later years, he remained financially comfortable with an estimated net worth of around $8 million as of 2017, according to TheRichest.com. His journey into the music industry began in 1947 when he was discovered by New Orleans band leader Billy Diamond, a year before he married his wife Rosemary. Diamond recognized Fats' immense talent early on, setting him on a path that would eventually make him one of rock and roll's most influential figures. His career reached its peak in the 1960s and 1970s, solidifying his status as a musical legend. Throughout his lifetime, Fats received numerous accolades and honors for his contributions to music. In 1987, he was awarded the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, recognizing his enduring impact on the industry. A decade later, in 1998, he was presented with the National Medal of Arts by President Bill Clinton, one of the highest honors for an American artist. Fats Domino's legacy is one of groundbreaking music, resilience, and a deep love for his hometown of New Orleans. Despite his shy nature and preference for a quiet life, his influence on rock and roll is undeniable, and his timeless hits continue to inspire generations. From his humble beginnings to his chart-topping success, and even through personal struggles and the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, Fats remained a true icon of American music. What are your favorite memories or songs from Fats Domino? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more content on this channel. See you next time.